Let's test the audio. Is the audio alright? Audio test? Audio test? Alright, should be fine. Okay. Alright, let's start. Okay. Anyway, generally, what I'm going to be doing for the next, I don't know, maybe 2 to 3 hours is going to be talking about things that is generally on my mind. So what I tend to do is I tend to make YouTube videos on human influence to a certain extent, or how certain things work, such as psychology, such as like how attraction actually works, what is creepiness. So a lot of my thinking process, it's on the fly. So for those videos, what I generally do is that I will just click record with a general idea of what I want to talk about, and then the thoughts will flow for about the 30 minutes to, well, mostly it's around 50 minutes, and I will basically just upload the whole thing on YouTube. So I'm trying in a very new way to do this from the perspective of Twitch, and yeah, we can definitely see how it goes. Will I bring out Paint to do more illustrations, because that's generally what I do, right? I'll bring up Paint in order for me to illustrate, draw certain things. So that's also something that potentially I could do, but we'll see from here, right? I don't really have a plan in mind starting this stream. It's more of I'm gonna click record, and then I'm going to talk, maybe the things that is on my mind, or just sharing on a general topic of psychology. Right? So again, I'm giving this preface in case anybody were to watch the VOD and then they are wondering what type of things or what type of content I do over here. They are wondering what. Let me just mute this. Okay, I need to find a way to actually keep track of all these things. Yeah, maybe that's not that important. I'm just going to talk. If any things were to come up in terms of chat, then we'll address them. But in any case, perhaps we should just get into it. Should I talk about the things that is on my mind, or should I just start with psychology? For me, personally, at least for the videos that I've done, more towards the direction of human influence, I focus mainly on 2 particular principles. Because for me myself, a short introduction is that I enjoy learning about psychology. And I think it's the natural human curiosity to want to know how people come to make decisions. Why is it that people takes certain actions, so to speak, right? Why is it that there are somebody who, for example, like, you know, what makes somebody fall in love, right? What makes a girl like a guy, what makes a guy like a girl, and whether or not you can reasonably predict or maybe even influence this process. So these are the things that interest me. And throughout my time learning about psychology, cumulative, perhaps maybe about 10 plus years, casually, right? I'm not formally educated in psychology. I didn't take my diploma or my degree in psychology, but what I do is that I constantly, on my own free time, read up on psychology. So even the writings of famous psychologists such as Carl Jung or the Sigmund Freud. But again, these are not the thing that is important, because the interesting thing about my journey in psychology so far, from a casual perspective, not going through the formal education route, it means that I look for knowledge wherever it can be found. So be it's from pickup artists, right? Pickup artists with their thoughts of, okay, how do I attract people, and even neuro-linguistic programming, right? Which is akin to a little bit like hypnosis. It's generally a cause and effect kind of things, right? If I were to do A, then likelihood the results is that B will happen in somebody's mind. So this is generally how my knowledge in psychology comes about. So I learned about a lot of different kind of things. I learned about like what I described, right? Along with things such as body language reading and personality, how to actually profile somebody, and based on the different type of personalities, what are the things that the different personalities actually look for, right? What do they value? And mostly the personality profiling I do, it's based on the theory of Carl Jung, which is also coincidentally what MBTI is built upon. So for the different types, what are their motivations? So from my observation, when it comes down to all these different types of knowledge in the field of psychology as a whole, if we want to use them for influence, there are techniques and principles that will take longer for somebody to learn and apply compared to some other principle. An example of which is body language reading, right? How do I actually teach somebody to read body language in a 30 minutes lesson? Likelihood they won't be able to do it, right? Because I didn't take 30 minutes to learn all these things. I learned the body language itself, and then I go out into the world and I try to observe and see if I'm able to observe that same exact thing, right? So it's a lot of trial and error. But then again, there is also other principles, which is so long as you do it, you start applying it after learning it, then you can very quickly get good results. Because again, body language, yes, you can read body language, but in order for body language to be beneficial for you, you would have to be able to translate that into an interaction with somebody, right? So if you are able to know what they think, it's only step one. Then there's also like step two. But then when we are talking about certain techniques such as mirroring itself, if you start to apply your mirroring, then it's kind of brain dead. You don't have to understand why mirroring works. Of course, for me, what I tend to do, or at least like one of the first videos that I made, was on the principle and concept of mirroring, right? At least at the basic level, and I went in depth about how it actually works, right? You know, the internal process of the brain, what does it do, how do people actually process thoughts, and eventually how it works, right? But then I also realized that most people, they also don't really want to know too in depth about the personalities itself, right? Most people want to utilize psychology from a utility standpoint, which means to say that just tell me what to do to get the maximum results. So it leads me to think that, okay, I definitely at some point I need to redo and remake the video in a way that is able for any random person to be able to pick up the principles and start applying them, right? And it should be condensed in at most a 30 minutes video for all the important principles that they need, right? So that to me is the challenge, but let's see how it goes. Maybe what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna take this time, this maybe roughly 2 hours, 2+ hours, for me to actually think out loud and figure out how am I gonna do that, right? And along the way, definitely what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna have to touch on the principles itself. What do you actually need to understand in order for you to immediately use 2 concepts that in my head basically accounts for 80% of the influence process. So which means to say that if today what you want to do is that you want to start to implement certain form of behavior to make yourself more charismatic, maybe you're a little bit awkward person, you don't know how to act, and you want to know what is the efficient way to actually go about interacting with people, then these 2 principles is going to bring you, what's the term I'm looking for, right? It's gonna go far for you, right? I'm not even sure if like that's the correct term for that, because unlike other principles where it takes longer time to learn, these 2 principles is very straightforward. It's very easy to understand and it's very easy to apply. And these 2 principles are, number 1, mirroring, right? And number 2 is sense of importance. Now, before I go into mirroring and sense of importance, it is very important to understand what people usually understand influence or maybe human influence as. Now, under human influence, there is 2 different categories. One is power and one is influence. So what's the difference between power and influence, right? For most people who see influence, most of the time what they'll think of or what they want to utilize is power, right? Because power is immediate. Power is your title. Power is basically what rights or the ability to immediately control somebody. Maybe that's the term, right? And the best way for me to describe power is that power influences behavior through the control of consequences and basically reward and punishment, right? Power controls through reward and punishment. And if you look at somebody, for example, your superior, right, your boss or whatsoever, maybe to a certain extent your parents, the reason why they have power over you is because they are able to control rewards and punishment, right? You don't do certain things, then I'm going to punish you, right? You know, be it I'm gonna dock your pay, I'm gonna ground you, or maybe I even fire you, right? And taking away rewards, well, in some ways being fired is taking away rewards, because what you're looking for is an income, right? If you're being fired, then you don't have that, or maybe they can take away your promotion, right? You know, it's the whole idea of, okay, if you don't comply, then I'm gonna take away your promotion, your potential promotion, right? Or I'm gonna mark your performance for this year as terrible, right? And it's gonna affect your career trajectory. So another thing about power you also have to understand is that immediately you can already notice that there's implicit and then there is explicit, right? That is directly saying that if you don't do this, then I'm gonna do this, or like, you know, if you do this, then I'm gonna do this. Whereas there's also on the other hand, there's also the type of power which is, well, if you decided to, you can do whatever you want, but then you know that I control your promotion because I'm your supervisor, right? I do your appraisal at the end of the day. So I can in some sense don't have to verbally say that like, oh, you better do this, but you understand implicitly that if you don't make me happy, then, well, you're going to suffer. So the thing about power, and the reason why people want to chase power, is because power is primal, based on the different types of ways our brain works, etc. The most primal level is our emotions, right? Well, it's not the most primal level, right? The lowest level is actually your reptilian brain, but after that it's your animal brain. Then it's only after your animal brain, then it's your higher function, right? Your logical brain. So when it comes down to power works upon the principles of like the animal brains, right? And it's very deeply rooted in us as the human animal to obviously know all these things from an intuitive perspective. So animals understand power as well, right? Because we can see in terms of if two animals were to see each other, for example, if let's say a prey and a predator were to see each other for the first time, then they're gonna figure out very quickly, okay, who's the prey, who's the predator, right? If I act like a predator, then you better act like a prey, because if I chase after you and I have big claws, I have big teeth, and you don't run, then you are going to die, right? So again, if we look even in the example of a predator, what we see is that power is still from the perspective of the rewards and punishment, right? So because of this, and again, the thing about power is that when we apply power in a primal way, in a primal level, we feel good, right? And this is the thing about understanding the human behavior, is that there's few things that go against our general beliefs or our general understanding of human beings, right? There's few things that people have to understand, and if they don't consciously understand all these things, then they open themselves up to being very susceptible to being influenced or being controlled, manipulated by other people, right? And one of which is that for us, we are not our masters. We are not the masters of our universe, right? As much as human beings want to think that we are completely logical and in control, in reality that's not the case. We are heavily controlled by our emotions. We can do what we can to control it, but mass majority of people are actually susceptible to the whims of their emotions itself. So that's number one. Then number two is also, well, the human animal. First of all, we have to understand that we are animal, because a lot of things that affect the behavior of animal is also going to affect the human. So if you see yourself as, well, I'm better than an animal, then you are not going to prep yourself and basically be aware of all the other things that an animal is susceptible to. So power is one example, right? If you yourself think of it as like, well, I'm a human being, I'm not going to be influenced by anything related to animals, then, well, guess what? For somebody who's very in tune with that part, then when they apply power against you, it's not like you can do anything about it. Or maybe you might even fall and you might even comply without consciously being aware that you are being influenced by all these forces, right? And another thing is that you must understand, as somebody who wants to learn and understand human being, is that human beings are not as pure and good as people like to believe, right? I think that there's this idea of, oh, we are so much better than animals, right? And it is true to a certain extent that I think as human beings, we should hold ourselves to a higher regards compared to animals, because what separates us from animals is civility, right? So if we're not being civil, then we are no different from animals, right? And maybe that statement alone, right, we not being similar to, we are no better than animals, already implies that in general human beings think that we are better than animals. But the thing is that people don't really want to face, because again, whenever they are referencing human beings and whenever they are looking at the flaws of human beings, it indirectly also highlights their own individual flaws, because they themselves are human, right? So if the whole idea is that, okay, human beings are implicitly, well, not implicitly, right? You know, it's ingrained in us to be selfish and a little bit of narcissistic, right? People will see it as, okay, narcissism is only to a certain threshold. So for example, like, you know, okay, you must have this level of selfishness in order for you to classify as narcissism. And so long as I'm below that point, then I'm considered as like completely healthy human being. The way that I understand it is that everybody is narcissistic to a certain extent. And the reason why this is the case, well, I don't really know why people are narcissistic, but I'm able to observe that people are narcissistic in nature because the principle of sense of importance actually targets this weakness of the human animal, right? It's our need to feel important, it's our need to feel like we are the masters of universe, we're the most interesting person in the world, and all these traits, all this thinking is in line with the behavior of narcissism. Maybe at a less severe level. Again, it is true that if everybody is narcissistic, then the whole term of narcissism itself loses all meaning, right? Because any sort of descriptors that is used to categorize and describe everything in a population loses its meaning, right? So for example, if another example is that, like, okay, if everybody is beautiful, then there is no such thing as beautiful, right? In order for some people to be beautiful, other people have to be ugly, right? And for some people to be smart, other people have to be dumb. So in the example of narcissism, yes, we are going to have our Mother Teresas among us, but again, I'm fairly certain that because of the innate narcissism of the human animal, the principle of sense of importance would still probably work, right? Maybe not as effective. Basically, sense of importance is going to work as well, right? More effectively for people who tend to be lonely, or people who tend to be more narcissistic, right? More self-referential, if people don't want to use the term narcissistic. So again, it's always to understand that for human being, we are not perfect, we are not ideal creatures, right? We are extremely flawed. And you have to understand that as flawed creatures, we have weaknesses, and one of the weaknesses potentially is that, well, we're being swayed by external forces, one of which is our sense of importance, right? Linked to our narcissism, to a certain extent can also be linked to our emotions. And if you don't see it as like, okay, I could potentially be influenced by that, then guess what? Whoever who is able to pull that string is able to control you. So I think I talked enough about this, right? So going back to the example, or going back to the topic of power itself, the downside of power is that whenever power is being utilized against us, it makes us feel like shit. It makes us feel incredibly good when we utilize power on another person. But it makes us feel like complete shit when people use power against us. So one example of power is, for example, if let's say I'm giving you a command, I'm giving you an instruction, I'm saying that, like, okay, you better do this, right? For example, like what's a concrete example that I can use, right? Maybe a parent, right? A parent, like, they say that, like, okay, you better do your homework, right? Or I'm going to take away your rights to play video games, right? No video games for 1 month if you don't do your homework, right? And of course, as the parent, they'll feel like yeah, I'm doing my due diligence, right? I'm actually being very fair, I'm being very impartial, I'm doing it for the sake of my child. All of it is true, but the thing that people don't really consciously want to acknowledge is that when you give that instruction, when you apply power over something else, somebody else, a creature, right? I tend to believe that it feels better when it's a sentient creature. So which means to say that if you apply power against a bot, like a AI or anything, like for example, if let's say you play a game, right, and then you're trashing the crap out of a computer, a CPU, then it doesn't feel as good as if you are playing a game and then you're trashing the crap out of an actual player, right? So I do believe that, again, it's the innate cruelty of human beings, right? And it's not about the human being. This is a weakness that is not linked to human beings, but it's a weakness linked to animals as a whole, right? Because I think that animals have a capacity to be cruel. But of course, what separates us humans with animals is that we have the capacity to be conscious about our cruelty, right? I think that, like, for example, killer whales are known to play with their prey, right? Potentially like torture them or anything like this, but then we don't view them as evil because we see it as like, okay, they don't have the capacity to understand the cruelty. But the difference between us and animals is that we have the capacity to understand cruelty, and maybe to a certain extent we should hold ourselves to a higher standard, but it doesn't excuse our way of behaving, if it makes sense. So anyway, going back to the whole idea of power is that, again, it makes people feel like shit when power is being applied against them. And when it comes down to human behavior, the thing that you have to realize is that if you make people feel like shit in the expense of getting your own emotional satisfaction because it feels good to control other person, the downside of utilizing power is that when and if the other person have an opportunity to screw you over, they will take the opportunity to screw you over. So you can look at history, right? A tyrannical king oppressing the population will, at some point, when revolt happens, when overthrow happens, or maybe another ruler from another external forces comes in, right? And the people have an opportunity to screw over the tyrannical king, they will do everything in their power to do so. Because again, human beings have extremely is an exaggeration, right? But human beings have high ego. And I think ego is part of the higher thinking, right? I'm not even sure if like animals have the concept of ego. I don't believe so, right? It's the whole idea of like my own self-worth, and my social standing among peers. Can I say that like animals have ego? Like, I'm pretty sure that like in a prime ape society, among monkeys, they are not going to tolerate any sort of weaker monkeys, going up against like the leader or the alpha monkeys, right? I don't know. Okay, but the general idea is that humans have egos, and when you bruise a human being's ego, then this is where one principle that you have to start, right? This is when the important principle that you need to learn when it comes down to human behavior. And this principle is called the fuck you factor, right? Now, the FU factor comes into play whenever people feel like their control is being taken away from them. And the most common form of this is when people try to tell us what to do, right? When people tell us what to do, when people give us unsolicited advice, then what tends to do is that the first thing that comes into our mind is that we will resist whatever they tell us. No matter how grounded, no matter how sound the advice is, we don't see it as advice, we see them as commands, right? We see them as commands, and we see it as degrading and even disrespectful for them to voluntarily open their mouth and try to tell us what to do, right? And as good of or whatever, as valid their input is, we are going to instinctively resist it. And that's the fuck you factor, right? And if you want to influence human beings, this is a principle that you have to be very aware of. So, for example, if you want to learn how to influence and manipulate somebody else, right? The moment that they are consciously aware of it, then what they'll do is that they'll get extremely stubborn. And that is the results of the fuck you factor, right? Which is people are going to get incredibly stubborn the second that you trigger this principle. And one of the fastest way for you to trigger this principle is you utilize power. So when it comes down to when influencing the behavior of another person, for me personally, I will always find it better, instead of using the principle of power, to use the principle of influence. But of course, I haven't talked about influence, right? So like, what's the difference between influence? What's the difference between power? And this is the part where it gets kind of a little bit confusing, because yes, I separate them into influence and power, but at the end of the day, both influence and power is under the category of power. So if you're just hearing this for the first time, then you should be like, what the fuck are you talking about, right? The influence, the full term of the influence is actually influential power. And when I refer to power, what I usually refer to is traditional power. And both of them fall under the general category of power, and that category of power is used to describe any sort of action that you take to influence another person's behavior, if that makes sense, right? But before I touch on to influence, I just want to close off power itself. So I talk about the fuck you factor, I talk about how power works, why people utilize power, and then how power is being utilized, right? Always the control of rewards and punishment. And here's the thing, that most of it that I said about power is negative, but that doesn't necessarily mean that power is irrelevant, because power have one absolute advantage over influence. Well, actually, technically it's two, right? Number one is that power, usually, provided that you have actual power, right? So what is actual power? If you have a title, right? And the most straightforward way to see this is from a military standpoint, right? If I'm your superior officer, higher rank than you, then whatever I say goes. Because if you were to disregard whatever I say, then you are going to be liable to being court-martialed. You're going to get charged, right? You're going to get punished. You might even be thrown into jail. And another example of that is that of a police officer and a civilian, right? Yes, you can try to swing your weight around, you try to go against the police officer, but so long as the police officer is doing his due diligence, he's not abusing his power, he's doing what he's supposed to do, he have actual power, right? And the actual punishment that he can impose upon you is that, well, he throw you into jail. So that's actual power, right? So of course, power is also an illusion, right? There's also the perception of power. And the strange thing is that, again, if I were to just move influence to power for a brief moment, there is such thing called influential power in the context of power itself. So what do I mean? If somebody in a social group, they don't have actual titles, right? They are not your actual superior. Maybe it's a co-worker, but this co-worker is very well connected, very well liked by everybody, right? Everybody thinks highly of him, everybody likes him, and provided that he himself is not an actual asshole in reality, maybe he's just really nice, right? He's generally nice, generally caring, and genuinely well liked by people. If you want to go against that person, right? For example, if you decided that, like, you know what, I don't like about something about this person, I'm going to lash out in front of him, you have to think twice. Because the thing is, if you offend him and everybody likes him, then you're opening yourself up to being hated by everybody. And being hated by everybody and being outcasted by a social group right? By the way, for social animals, right? Human being one of them, being outcast by your social group is equivalent to death. And this is very ingrained in us, right? Why do people feel so bad about being outcasted, right? So, funnily enough, it stems from evolution. Because in the early parts of like early human beings, right, where we're still living in tribes, maybe you can think of it as like, you know, we're apes, right? We are extremely vulnerable, right? The early human beings, right, maybe not even Homo sapiens, maybe like the species before Homo sapiens are extremely vulnerable because, well, we don't have large muscles, we don't have large teeth, we don't have large claws. So which means to say that the strength of the Homo sapien animal is that we are able to band together and pool our strength. So we are able to protect each other, right? So you can look at it as like a group of monkeys. A group of monkeys is dangerous because you can't single one of it out. It's not like a group of gazelle where if a lion were to eat one, then everybody else runs away. So the survival strategy of early human being is that we have to band together and we have to protect each other. So, but then again, if you are somebody who have been outcasted by your tribe in early prehistoric times, then you are as good as dead. And you can say that for people who are in the tribes are those that eventually reproduce and pass on the genes or maybe pass on the teaching to their offsprings on the importance of being part of the tribe. Right, so maybe that's why human being is so conforming by nature, right? Because we don't want to be outcasted by the tribes. So, going back to the whole idea of like influential power, is that being well liked is also part of power itself. So, which is why I describe it as like influence is actually under power, because if you offend the well liked person in a social group, you are basically opening yourself to being outcasted by people. So, again, this is the part where I do a short detour on dark psychology. Yes, people can technically what's the term I'm looking for? They can technically influence whether or not people outcast another person. This is dark psychology, right? So if you are able to share the certain information that is going to cause person A to hate person B or anything like this, there's way to influence and manipulate to outcast somebody. So that is the darker side of psychology, right? So again, when it comes down to human influence, I think the reason why most people don't openly teach human influence, especially for people who understand them rather well, first of all is that it takes some time to actually get there. But another thing is also the ethical consideration, right? The psychology can actually be used quite negatively. But anyway, I need to close off power. So, to close off power, the advantage of using power is 1, higher success rate. Right? If I actually have power, I actually have the rank against you, right? I'm your senior officer, superior officer. What I say goes, then I have a higher probability of succeeding. Because the opposite of influence is that I allow you the choice to do whatever you want, and I'm going to encourage you to do the things that I want, right? Of course, if I were to just pull it out here, based on this general description, right, then you right now listening to this, you should instinctively think that like, aha, if somebody tries to do that to me, I wouldn't want to do it. Why? Because again, going back to the fuck you factor, remember what I said about fuck you factor is that at any point of time we feel like our own freedom of autonomy, our own autonomy is being threatened. So based on my description of influence, right, which is like to give the person the free choice, but then to kind of like guide them towards the outcome that you want, immediately is going to make people think of like, well, that's not going to work on me, like, or like, well, I hate that, right? I don't want people to do that to us. The funny thing about being influenced by influence is that it's actually the most ideal way to interact with human beings. It's very weird, but again, the downside of that compared to power is that power is immediate, right? If I'm a superior officer, let's say for example I'm at war, right? Or maybe we're at war and we are short on ammo, and the ammo is like all the way over there. So I'm the superior officer, so I get my my subordinate, right, to basically get the ammo from there to here so that we can continue to fight the war, right? Now I can use influence. I can be like, oh, this maybe private Tan, right? Private Tan, like, the how do you think the things are currently? Yeah, it's quite bad. Yeah, correct. That's like what do you feel? Do we have like enough resources to actually tackle all these things? Oh, don't have, what do you think that, like, we actually want to, it'll be good to have, like, it'll be good to have the ammo, correct? You agree, right? Then, like, if you don't mind, right, up to you, you can choose whether or not you want to, but like, would you please like go there to get the ammo and then like come back, cause it'll be very useful to our effort and everything, but completely up to you, right? The downside of influence in that example is success rate and time, right? If I'm going through all these things with Private Tan can decide that, like, maybe I don't feel like it, or like, well, let me think about it, right? Then it's gonna waste time, right? We're at war, we don't have time for all these things. That is the situation where power will be more appropriate, right? This is the situation where me as a superior officer is gonna be like, hey, fuck that, okay? Like, go there, grab the ammo, or like, like, what's gonna happen to you, right? Like, court martial, or I don't know, being shot for insubordination and everything like that, right? And then this like asshole is going to immediately do the thing. So the thing about power is that because power works on such a primal level, power actually hijacks the rational mind. So especially when power is being utilized, and that is when both parties, so this is another concept to learn, right, which is called framing. When both parties see it as the same perspective. For example, I see myself as I'm the superior officer of you, I have more power over you. And if the other person also see it as I'm the subordinate of this person, the other person have more power, the more power than me, then it works on the principle like my instructions is going to hijack basically his rational mind, because he don't even think about all these things. He don't need to think about all these things. Straight away, I talk to the animal brain instead of the rational brain, and therefore, like, in his head is that he listens to the superior officer saying that go there, grab the ammo. Then the only thing he do is that, oh, go there, grab the ammo. He don't need to think about, okay, should I go there or should I not go there and everything like that. Of course, it doesn't discount people who are more overthinking in general, more cerebral in general, but the whole idea is that when power is being utilized, is targeting the rational mind, right? So that's that part settled. So now we're moving on to influence. Of course, I did share a little bit about influence, of how it works from the perspective of the example with the war, right? Influencing the other person. So if power is the control over rewards and punishment, then what makes influence different, right? Different enough for me to see it as, well, maybe we should have a different category of it altogether. So what makes influence stand out or contrast against power? Now, power works on the principle of I don't care whether or not you are happy, and you can even say that power to a certain extent is amplified or categorized by how unhappy it makes you. So one example is that if two person is trying to size each other up, which is very natural for human beings, right? We are able to tell very quickly in an interaction between two people who is more dominant than the other person. So that is like you and a stranger, right? So for example, you're walking straight, right? You are walking down the road, or maybe you're on your way to work, right? You're walking down the path, and then from the opposite direction, somebody also walk down the path, right? The thing is, both of you, maybe you are walking. We don't take into consideration of like, okay, you are walking to the left side, I'm walking to the right side, so we have no natural form of connection, right? But let's just take into the consideration of power is on the principle of how shitty I make you feel. So yes, I can stick to left side and then you can stick to right side, but if I want to show that I'm dominant, I'll walk in the center. Why? Because, well, screw everybody around me. And now when we are walking towards each other, we will immediately size each other up. Then depending on how we size each other up, one of us give way. Be it the other person give way or I give way. Or maybe I for a brief moment lower the level of my assertion of power. So for example, instead of like walking in the center of the road, I decided, okay, like, just to pass you, I'm just going to walk to the left so that we don't collide with each other, and then like, we continue walking forward. Of course, for people who don't think about all these things, or people who are learning this for the first time, right, they'll see this as like, wait, that's a very minor thing. Do people actually think like that, right? The truth is, people don't really think like that, but people subconsciously act like that. Because again, these are things that is controlled by our subconscious mind. Nobody is insane enough to consciously be walking down the street and actually think to themselves, you know what, I want to dominate the other person walking down there, and then I'm gonna stand in the center, right? If somebody consciously think this type of thoughts, then there is actually something really wrong with them, right? But then the whole idea of what separates somebody from being naturally powerful versus somebody who is not perceived as naturally powerful is just how we subconsciously act. So going back to what I'm saying, which is power can be categorized as how shitty you make somebody feel, right? How much of your space can I take, right? How much are you going to give to me, right? If let's say we are sharing a table, how many percentage of the table can I actively control? Actively control means that if I take up this space, you would feel naturally uncomfortable to actually breach that space. But like, what if me and the other person are friends? Then friends, by the way, work on the principle of influence almost immediately already, unless these two are not actually friends, right? They are friends on the surface, but in actual fact they are like competing with each other, right? Secretly they hate each other. But if they are genuine friendship, then we are working on the principle of influence, right? Influence is more appropriate for most, I would say, friendly interaction. Reason being is that whereas power works on the principle of the more shitty I make you feel, the more powerful I am. Influence works on the principle of if the more you like me, the more you are likely to do good things for me. So this thing is in line with tribe mentality, right? When we are surviving in a tribe. Again, I already talked about tribe for a while previously, right? A while ago, in regards of the being outcasted in the tribe is equivalent to death, right? But then it also means that whoever we see as our tribe, right, in medieval times or like prehistoric time, not only are we concerned with, well, who is in our tribe, we are also concerned with external tribes. So the tribe mentality is so ingrained in us as human beings and how competitive we are, right? That simple things such as being put on red team versus blue team, if you are red team, without understanding why, you will immediately think, wow, fuck the blue team, man. That's the stupid thing, right? And again, if you want an example of this, think back to when Pokemon Go just first came out, right? You know, the golden age of Pokemon Go, right? When Pokemon Go just came out, I think it's back in 2016, when people will join a different group, right? You know, it's like either you join the blue team, you join the red team, or you join the yellow team. And then if you join the blue team will be like, hey, red people are like apes, man. And then like, you know, the maybe the red team will be like, you know, hey, blue people are I don't know, like nerds or something, or anything like that, right? You know, it's ingrained in human being, our tribe mentality, to first of all demonize the other tribe, right? You know, just for the fact of being different. Maybe this is the reason why racism exists in the world. It's not because, well, partially is maybe because of like past experience and everything like that, but maybe the initial, if we trace back to all the way from the first instance of like, you know, the stemming of racism, for example, right? Maybe it's as simple as just chalked up to tribe mentality, where it's just they're like, hey, you're a different color than me. I don't know, like, you know, okay, human being, again, like I said, right, the human animal is so flawed, right? And part of the flaw is that, well, the tribe mentality, right? So that's the negative of tribe mentality, but then there's also a positive of tribe mentality. If we think in terms of like the Newtonian laws of physics, like I forgot what's the term, right? Every force have like a equivalent counter force or something. I'm butchering the thing, you know. I'm not a physics person, right? But you know, it's the principle, right? For every action there is an equivalent something action, right? A reaction or something like that, right? You know, for every action there is an equal reaction. So you can think of it this way, right? You know, the hate that people portray in a tribe mentality, right? You know, from a red team perspective, like fuck the blue team, is compensated by being more protective of people in your tribe. So if tribe doesn't exist right now, then like you can think of the interaction with everybody as neutral. So if we were to put a number to it, we put the number 0, right? Because again, the 0 represents nothing. But if tribe is being introduced and people start to form groups together, and I see people of another group as -1, which means that I dislike them, then in order for the equation to still make up to 0, it means that, well, the plus 1 goes to people in my tribe. So again, this is more mathematical. It's more of like, you know, for people to actually think about this. This is not actual theories that people have put forth about these things, right? It's just how you like to think about it. But the important thing is that it's a very long-winded way for me to just say that tribe mentality people give good things for their tribe. So think in terms of like the example that I like to use to describe this, right, outside of the red versus blue example, is if you're walking down the street and then a random stranger come up to you and say that, like, you know, hey, can I have $2? Well, what are most people gonna do? Again, maybe if you're wealthy, you're super wealthy, right, and then $2 is nothing to you, you'll be like, hey, whatever, here you go, $2, right? But this argument can just be escalated to any sort of number. Like maybe instead of $2 they ask for $10. Then, well, most people view will be like, no, I don't want to give you $10, right? Again, want, right, is emotions, right? No, I don't want to give you $10. But then from another point of view, or maybe not another point of view, from another scenario, is that instead of a random stranger, now you have your best friend. Your best friend comes up to you and then your best friend say, hey man, like, can I have $10? Now, you might not immediately say yes. Again, this comes down to personalities, right? But comparing the two, what are you more likely to say yes to? Giving $10 to a stranger or giving $10 to your best friend? Likelihood your best friend. Like, why is that the case? Tribe mentality, right? Of course, if people were to ask you like, well, why is it? Then the answer is as simple as like, well, just because it's my best friend, right? But if you have to know, it's because of tribe mentality. So the thing about influence, right? Cause this is a detour about influence. The thing about influence is that it works on the principle of the more that you like me, the more that you are likely to do good things for me. Which means to say that the influence itself is trying to hijack and trying to make the other person perceive you to be part of their tribe. So, well, how do I make somebody perceive me as part of their tribe? Think to your own personal close friends. Likelihood, the reason why you guys are close friends is because you have certain similarities. Now this is interesting, right? Because again, there are some people are gonna say that I'm very different from my best friend, which is true. Now, this thing applies for both relationships, be it romantic relationship or platonic relationship or friendly relationship. Yes, what makes an interaction interesting are our differences. But what makes us bond and stay together are our similarities. So, which means to say that if you're completely different people, you guys are not going to be friends in the first place. But if you guys are 100% similar to each other, then, well, it gets boring. So most interactions are kind of like a mix. But the reason why somebody is your friend, you must always remember, is because of the similarities. And this example also shows what makes somebody our enemies. For most people, right, and when you are somebody who start to apply influence on a regular basis, you would start to realize how similar you are to every single person that you meet. I can talk to any single person out there and paint a picture of how similar we are. And I will not be telling a lie. I'm not deliberately trying to manipulate them. Yes, I want a certain results, but I don't use lies to get to what I want. I'm using 100% truths, right? And the thing is, you'll be able to find similarities with practically everybody out there, regardless of how much you like them, regardless of how much you hate them. But the only difference is that for people that we like, we find more similarities. And for people that we hate, we focus on the negative. We focus on what makes us different. So this is the funny thing about tribe mentality, right? And if what we're trying to do is that we are trying to make us similar so that they'll think that we're part of the tribe, basically what we're doing is that we're making it easy for them, right? Of course, do people form similarities and take note of similarities naturally by themselves? Yes, obviously, right? Because if they don't, then I won't even say authentic, right? It's not really authentic, it's just natural, right? There won't be any sort of naturally forming friendships if all friendships have to manually find the similarities. But the thing about you, if you're using the principle of influence, is that you are trying to make it easy for them. You are trying to highlight and basically make it very obvious of how similar both of you are. Which moves to one of the principles that I talked about at the start, right? The two most important principles. Number one is mirroring. So this is where it comes in, right? So you can already start to understand that at this junction, that when it comes down to influence and charisma, it's very important for you to basically master influence instead of power. Now that doesn't mean that power is not important. That's the thing that I need people to understand, that it doesn't mean that power is not important. Because in some sense you can say that if you're somebody who focus on influence, right, which means to say that there are going to be people who are very naturally kind, naturally amicable and agreeable. So they're going to go through the world using influence, right, because they want people to be happy. And if they encounter somebody who applies power against them, then if they're unable to actually match the other person in the capacity of power, right? So which means to say that somebody tries to overstep their bounds and they don't have the backbone to actually assert themselves, then what they notice is that, or the experience that they'll face is, they are going to basically get controlled by the person with power. So, but then again, the issue that I usually see for human beings is not that they are unable to utilize the power part, right? It's not the case of, in general, people are very in tune with influence, but they need to learn how to apply power. There are some people like that, but that is actually the mass minority of the population. The mass majority of the population instinctively utilize power or want to utilize power, because there's a difference between the not utilizing power because you actively want to use influence so that people feel good, versus not using power because you yourself innately is incapable of utilizing power. So which means to say that if you are not well liked, and you are small, and you are scrawny, and basically you don't have any sort of redeeming traits, then what do you actually have to apply power? Right? You can try to bang on your chest, and then you can try to talk to somebody who is like larger, bigger size than you, of like, hey, you should listen to me. Like, again, how do you actually exert that level of power? You can't, right? So there is this idea of, again, I think that this is a really, really big detour, right? Because this is almost going to another direction already, but I need to be aware to not overshare this part and basically still keep on track of influence, right? But just to briefly talk about this, the thing about the people who are unable to exert power, it's not because of morality, of having better principle, that they are nice to people. They are nice to people, or maybe to the extent they are not tyrannical to other people, not because of their morals, but because of their weakness. So those people would normally see themselves as noble, because I don't take advantage of other people. But the reason why they don't take advantage of other people is not because they have the capacity but they don't do so, but because they themselves are weak. And those are the people that, from what I observe, is problematic when they actually start to get power, because that's when they have the capacity, right? And again, funnily enough, it's the person who actually are powerful that have an easier time utilizing influence. Because first of all, it's kind of it's the Teddy Roosevelt's quote, right? Which is, speak softly but carry a big stick. So the whole idea is that, like, okay, if instinctively you look at me as somebody who is very fierce, and like, if we're going through the route of power and we are trying to dominate each other, you are not going to have a good time. But then instead of utilizing power against you, I'm going to be nice and cordial with you, and I'm going to use influence. Most people were much more likely to take that, right? It's kind of like, why would I want to go the hard way when there's the soft way, right? Again, this is more advanced. This is more consideration that I feel like if you're just learning this from a basic level, it's too much for you to consider, right? The reason why I say all these things is that I can't stop myself, right? Because these are the things that I always think about, and like what I mentioned, I think out loud, right? So I have a topic in mind and I just open my mouth, whatever comes to mind, and then I share. So going back on track when it comes down to influence, right? So we have established that influence work on the principle of the more that you like me, the more that you are much more likely to do good things for me. And we have established that one of the ways to establish to influence people from influence perspective, right, is to utilize mirroring. So what is mirroring? I think most people are not going to, it's not going to be a concept that's going to be new to many people. I would say mass majority of people have at some point did some research of like or maybe they heard from a friend of how to be more likable, right? And one of which is that, or maybe even things such as like, how do I tell if a girl likes me? How do I even tell if a guy likes me? And one of it is always talking about mirroring of body language. Now, because human beings, naturally, when we are in rapport with each other, and if you don't know what rapport is, rapport basically means how synchronized you are. So if you think in terms of your best friends, when you interact with each other, usually both of you are quite synchronized. So synchronized can also be interchangeable with the term mirroring, right? For mirroring, there's a lot of aspect of mirroring. First of all, there's the mirroring of energy. For two people to interact with each other, if now I'm the person, right? I'm somebody who is more mellow, low energy. The way that I speak is a little bit slower, right? Versus another person who's more excitable, right? They speak a lot faster, right? They are more animated and everything. Then like, everything is so exciting and everything, right? So if I'm talking to this person for the very first time, if what we observe is that, okay, we are very different. So like I'm going to continue to speak in my way and that he's going to continue to speak in his way. We are going to eventually not going to synchronize with each other. And we have very low rapport. But then again, if we talk about a common topic that we both like, right? So for example, oh, you like to play video games, I like to play video games. Then first of all, when we talk about things that we're excited about, even if you're a low energy person, your excitement will rise. So the low energy person will probably talk faster. They're like, oh, you like video games? Like, what type of video games do you play? And then the other person will also be like, the other person from higher energy, usually what they tend to do is that if they're bonding, so again, it's a capacity because we are talking about something that we're interested in, right? Two people would naturally, subconsciously, slowly match and mirroring each other. And in the example of energy, right, then what you'll notice is that the person who is excitable would actually slow down a little bit and then like try to match the energy of the person who is lower energy, right? So the lower energy will actually increase and then the higher energy will actually decrease. So to the point that they are like kind of similar to each other. So this is something that is quite innate in the human animal, right? The mirroring. And one of the mirroring is the mirroring of body language. So one of the things that if you go Google things such as like, how do I tell if a girl likes me? How do I tell if a guy likes me on a date? Then one of the things that pay attention is like, do they mirror you, right? Do they mirror you? Or do they actually face you? So for example, if let's say like this is facing to one side, right? But then if they are talking to you, then like they face you and everything like that. It's not an indication, by the way, for body language, right? It's not an indication of the thing. So it is to say that we should find people who are higher energy, higher knowledge in order to grow. Not necessary, but it's more towards the naturally what tends to happen is that people would naturally match it. So it's not that you have to find, right? I will even go as far to say that for people who have very extroverted friends versus but they themselves are very introverted, then usually what tend to happen that they get along well is because they are able to match the energy at some point. So the more introverted person in an interaction with their extroverted friend is that they're going to raise the energy and the extroverted is going to lower the energy. I think one of the things to also take note of is that when it comes down to mirroring, right? And when it comes down to rapport, there's also the aspect of if people are not contributing and not shifting their energy at the same level. So which means to say that if I'm somebody who's low energy and the other person is high energy, but in order for me to stay friends with the person, I must constantly raise my energy in all interaction. But the subconscious observation is that this person is not doing any sort of change to their energy. Then usually what happens is that resentment forms. So what I tend to notice in that situation is that, well, then that's not very tenable. From one party, the extroverted perspective is that like everything is going well, but then the introverted person is most likely going to feel like, okay, well, this is complete crap, the other person don't really care about me. Because if they care about me, then, well, they'll do all these things. But again, most people don't consciously think about this, right? Especially when it comes down to the matching of energies. But the point is, why would you want to lower your energy, right? If you are one with higher energy, why would you want to lower energy? I think it's the thing about this, right, is going on the principle of mirroring. So a lot of principle of rapport is not conscious. So it's subconscious. They don't really consciously know. They don't consciously want to keep a high energy. I would say that the subconscious consideration is that they actually want to bond more than they want to keep their level of energy, right? And again, the level of energy is because I also understand that there's different ways to describe this level of energy as well. So what I usually mean in the aspect of level of energy, right, is just how excitable they are when they interact with each other. So it's not so much of like the introvert extrovert's view of like our social energy, right? Do I get my social energy by interacting with people versus like, by being myself? So because the social energy is more towards comfort, right? How comfortable do I feel? Whereas excitability is just, I don't really think about it. It's just the natural speech. Like maybe like speech, number of words per second, if it makes sense. Like if you are the one with higher energy, human is a habitual animal. Eventually you will be the low energy. So if you are one with higher energy, human is a habitual. Eventually you will be the low energy. So what you mean? If you are somebody who's low energy, you'll naturally want to remain at low energy. I think that there's certain truth to it. So keep in mind that the example that we have is one is extremely, I agree on bonding, but coming from personal experience, I now prefer to surround myself with higher energy. So do you think you're more towards like lower energy, or do you think that you're more higher energy? One with higher, you'll be low energy, bonding. Because for me, I also know that, okay, if we are talking in terms of what is easier, I am always higher energy, but because I'm always hanging out with lower energy, I feel so drained. Yeah. So that's also something to consider, right? If you are somebody who has to match energy with a low energy, if we are just talking in terms of numbers, right? If we are talking in terms of numbers, we put high energy as 100 and we put low energy as 0. In order for you guys to match equilibrium, provided that both of you are putting equal contribution to the interaction, right? Which, by the way, this contribution again is subconscious. Nobody consciously think of like, I'm gonna give this level of energy. But for illustration, right, it means that the low energy one have to shift 50 points to reach 50, whereas you have to drop 50 points. But again, if you are matching with somebody who is higher energy, right? So for example, you are 100 and they are 75, then maybe like, you only need to move 12 and the other person only will move 13. So I think it's from this aspect of comparing, right, that you can start to see that naturally in the world, two people who are best friends or close friends, they tend to be quite similar in temperament. So I think it's more common for high energy people to be close friend with high energy and low energy to be close friend with low energy compared to high energy and low energy. I think like the high energy, low energy match is usually more often seen in fiction because again, it makes things interesting, right? Because it kind of shows things from two perspectives. I think this could only work with a small group of people you are interacting with. Yeah. So is actually a very good point, right? Because when the concept of this sharing itself, right, is on influence. And the thing that I have to highlight is that this principle of mirroring and later on sense of importance works most effectively in a one-to-one interaction. Because the more in tune you are in this, what you're basically doing is that you are shifting your behavior to match the other person. But from my own personal perspective, when I use this in group, then I realize, well, first of all, how do you actually tune? You can't like do speed tuning, right? So like for example, this person is higher energy, then I speed tune to high energy when I talk to them. Then like when I shift a conversation to another person, I talk to them like with low energy. So it's more effective on a one-to-one interaction when it comes down to utilizing all these things. And to the extent I will say that, of course, I'm deviating a little bit. In a social situation, when we are talking about a group of people, right? Then you start to have to use a mix of power and influence. And to a certain extent, it's more towards power. Because in group setting, it is not so much of like, oh, how much you like me. It is more of how much do you respect me? How much do everybody respect me? So it's kind of like if I'm interacting with 4 people, right? I need to keep in mind that their perception of me. But of course, when I go into a one-to-one interaction with them, right, then that's when I use more towards influence. Because the thing about influence is always getting them to like you. Whereas power is about, to a certain extent, how much I can get away with getting what I want while you are still going to tolerate it. I know how to speed tune, but I'm talking about the number of people you're interacting with in general. You'll feel super drained out if you choose to engage with lower energy people. Yes. Yep, that is 100% correct. Somehow the lower energy person will have the ability to suck off the energy and bring you to a lower energy. Okay, so now this is funnily enough, right? Because of course I will have to put a pause on the influence part, right? So we're gonna address this itself. Funnily enough, how much in terms of 2% when they shift their energy, right, depends on their personality type. So for me, I understand personality from the theories of Carl Jung. So this is also linked to a certain extent to MBTI, right? So I'm not sure whether or not you are familiar with MBTI itself. So when it comes down to feelings, right, the aspect that I see here is feelings, right? There is an extroversion of feelings and then there's an introversion of feelings. Introversion of feelings is concerned with what I feel and what I want. So somebody who is more introverted feelers, the stereotype is that they're selfish. Because I only concern with what I want. If my group of friends want to do this but I feel like I don't want to do this, then I'm not going to do it. Then extroverted feelers are somebody who is more concerned of feelings for other people. So which means to say that they're more caring, but the stereotype is that extroverted feelers are fake because they don't act in accordance to their own feelings. So the thing about if you are somebody who happens to be an extroverted feeler, right, depending on your MBTI type, then you'll notice that extroverted feelers are much more likely to actually accommodate people around them. So which means to say that if you are somebody who's high energy, right, so which means to say that if you happen to be an extroverted feeler, so maybe something like a ESFJ or a ENFJ or something similar to that, then what you'll notice is that, well, you're going to basically adjust yourself more to make other people happy. Yeah, so this is how basically it links. So again, if the person that you're interacting with is low energy and then they happen to be introverted feelers, then that's when you start to notice, right? Because the relationship between both is extroverted feelers give, introverted feelers take. But again, when it comes down to personality, right, I feel like personality is another sharing altogether by itself. For personalities, there's no such thing as good and bad. Just like in real life, I don't think that a world sustained by all extroverted feelers will be good. Because if you truly are extroverted feelers, then to a certain extent, it feels good to do good things for people, right? Right, you get the feeling of like, oh wow, like, it feels so good to do nice things for my friends. But then if you are introverted feelers, then you'll see as like, oh, it feels good for me to feel good. somehow you're more sensitive and you are like a sponge. But I think that you also need to highlight that if you are more in tune with the spiritual side, somehow you're more sensitive and you are like a sponge. Yes, if we are talking in terms of intuitive, right, intuition, then yes. I think that the funny thing about MBTI is also based on the different dichotomy, right? So for example, we are talking about dichotomy of intuition and sensory. So sensory is more towards like what is quantifiable in our immediate environment, whereas intuition is more towards like what you mentioned, spiritual, or maybe things that you can infer. So naturally, funnily enough, the sensory tend to be more thinking oriented because it's more objective, whereas intuition is more feelings oriented because it's more intuition based, right? You can't really prove and you can't equate the thing. So yeah, in that sense, I do think that is correct. If you are more intuitive, you're more in tune with your spiritual side, then you are much more likely to absorb them in the sponge because you are more closer to feeling type, if it makes sense. And somehow more sensitive, you feel so much and you absorb the aura. Unless you practice enough and you are able to block off the vibes. Yeah. Definitely, but based on what you described, definitely you do sound more towards like an intuitive feeler, right? Maybe no, but then you say you're high energy, right? So maybe like an extroverted intuitive feeler. Yeah, maybe based on what you described here, I'll think that maybe your personality type is more towards like ENFJ or something like that. Yeah. By any case, like if we are going back to influence itself, right? So what we established is that the mirroring is one aspect of being able to bond. So the thing about mirroring at the level of just utilizing it so that you get people to like you very quickly, you only need to understand mirroring from the level of mirroring of speech. So whenever I share about mirroring of speech, people tend to be very skeptical, like skeptical about how effective it works. Because when people hear it and people are consciously aware of it, it sounds ridiculous. So usually what I'll do is that I will illustrate this in paint itself, right? Should I illustrate this in paint? Let me think about it. Why be able to describe it? Because ideally I would want to describe this in terms of verbally, right? Because the whole idea is that I'm supposed to think about how I'm going to compress all these things into a 30-minute things, but I'm going to try to put it verbally, right? But if I really need to illustrate it in paint, or if you're watching this and you notice that okay, I can't really catch on, then I'm going to start to illustrate it in paint. So the whole idea of mirroring of speech itself works like this. And I like to illustrate this from the perspective of using something such as what is your greatest fear? So if I ask somebody like what is your greatest fear? How I explain now, I don't mirror others to make myself likable. I manage to make people mirror me instead and vibrate the same level as me, so it won't be draining for me. Well, if you manage to do that, then that's great, right? I think that the most important thing is that you must be able to find a system that works for you. So if you are able to get people to actually mirror you, then I think that to a certain extent, I'm not sure to what extent you understand the human psychology or human influence. And the funny thing is that you don't have to understand all these things to have good effect. So the way that I see it, right, the basic level of influencing the behavior is that I mirror you, right? So if let's say we are talking in terms of like what I basically utilize, right? But keep in mind that what I utilize is beyond mirroring and sense of importance, because I have all the other knowledge of body language, etc., right? But what you basically want to do is that you want to mirror them, so that you mirror them and they see that you are very similar. And once you have synchronized with them, you start to move and it's almost like a dance, right? So what you tend to do is that you first synchronize with them and then you start to move and you start to lead. Then you'll notice that if you're able to keep that synchronize, you're able to continue to synchronize with them, right? And you do it well in the first place, then what tends to happen is that, like, you know, if you were to move, then they'll usually move with you, right? Especially if you're already mirroring their values. Because when it comes down to our human behavior, right, our values is one of our deepest levels. So if let's say they think of it as like, you know, oh, I'm somebody who value fairness, and you mirror that value, right? You will tell them like, you know, oh, fairness, you're somebody who values fairness. I also think that fairness is very important, right? You know, because maybe there's so many selfishness in the world, right? And the world is not just for ourselves. And you mirror that, and then he start to see or she start to see that you're similar, then you just need to put something to a point, right? I know that I'm not explaining this in the best way. The mirror I managed to make, so yeah, it's like a wolf pack, yeah, kind of, right? But again, for me, when maybe it's my own usage, right? This mirroring and sense of importance, right, again, is when I do one-on-one interactions. So for me in my personal life, I'm very good at doing one-to-one interactions. And when it comes down to a group, again, it's so complicated because you don't have the time and you don't have the mental capacity. Maybe you could, maybe you would, but it's just more draining to continue to focus person one by one, or unless you isolate them in a group, right? So for example, if let's say a group of 10 people, and I think it's very natural for people to have ever been in a group of 10 people. So maybe you go for the running club, or maybe back in school you have like your orientation or something like that. In a group of 10 people, it's not sustainable. Usually in a group of 10 people will break out into a smaller group. So I think the efficient group size is about 4, right? But then if you're talking in terms of like 2 and 3, then, well, if you can even isolate one in that whole group, so if like you're a group of 10 people, right, but you're just talking with the person beside you, then yeah, you can use your influence, sense of importance, and you'll be very effective. But if you're trying to address, again, the group of 10 people, right, it is always more effective to use power, because at that level, you don't have the capacity to tailor the experience to each and every one of them, to put it very weirdly, right? But then what you want to do is that you want to perceive as a leader, so to speak. So a leader would apply more towards the power. Of course, there's also leaders that lead by soft skill, right? The leaders who lead by caring for everybody. Yeah, but generally it's that the perception that people have. I think easier for you to understand, my little community used to be called a childcare center. I allow everything and any vibration to come in trying to vibrate lower. Then I learn to make people vibrate like me instead, cause on a daily I meet about 10 to 15 new people, so I cannot always lower my vibration. So actually it's very strange, right? You know, so I understand better, like, what do you mean by vibration? Like, if you're able to give me like a explanation of what you mean by that. I replace energy to vibration. Oh, so it's just basically match energy. So let me just see. If either called I allow everything and any to come in trying to. So it's about trying to match your energy to somebody who's lower, right? Yeah. Like, funnily enough, I 100% agree with that, right? For me, I'm somebody who is hyper logical, but I also understand that intuitively there are things such as aura, like things that cannot really be explained. right? Like one of which is the subconscious connection with everybody. And strangely enough, a lot of things in NLP is as such, right? And the funny thing about human being is that, especially when it comes down to understanding our subconscious mind and utilizing our subconscious mind for our own benefit, a lot of things work on the principle of belief. So, principle of beliefs is quite linked to things such as energy and aura. And when we go closer to each other, the circle forms like a bubble. Yep. Funnily enough, what I tend to do is that if I want to bond with another person, that I imagine a connection between me, like a wire, connected to them. And funnily enough, when you do that, your subconscious mind, I don't know, something about your subconscious mind just maybe sends the message to them, and it just makes it so easier to connect. It's very weird. Can I know what's your streaming schedule? Funnily enough, this is actually the first stream that I do. Of course, I usually do like on and off, but ideally what I want to do is that I want to make it more often. Maybe what I want to do is that I want to try my best to make it every Sunday, maybe 7 to 10. Yeah, so maybe perhaps what I'll do is that I'll continue to do this maybe next Sunday. Again, it's dependent on time. I love this yapping session. Yeah, it's true. Right, for me, because what I tend to do is that a lot of things is I also overthink a lot. Right? I overthink a lot and I observe my internal state, how my emotion flows, how the emotion of other people flows. So a lot of things that I do, I also think out loud, right? So, which means to say that I have the capability to just open my mouth and talk. And again, these are things that I enjoy. So, and it's also fun that like for somebody like you to actually share your insight, then I'm able to like learn a little bit more. I think that's the whole idea of why I decided that I want to do streaming in this extent, because again, it's what I can share with people and what other people can actually share with me, right? Yeah. So in any case, like if we are going back to the whole idea of mirroring itself, right? The mirroring of speech, which is the lowest level and the easiest level to start to apply, is as simple as repeating the words that come out of the other person's mouth word for word. And of course, the thing about this, right, is it always works better in a one-to-one interaction, because in a one-to-one interaction, most people won't notice that their own words are being mirrored to them. Because the funny thing is that when people mirror our own words to us, it bypasses our conscious mind. So, for example, if let's say somebody have a conversation with you, and somebody were to say something such as maybe I give an opinion, right? Such as I don't know what opinion. I like the color blue. Usually what tends to happen is that the other person will have to process my sentence, right? Which is, I like the color blue. And they have to basically use their own dictionary and try to convert this thought into something they understand, right? But then again, when people mirror our own words to us, we don't have to convert the thoughts to the thing. We don't have to process and convert the thoughts, because the thoughts have already been pre-converted already. So, which means to say that when people mirror our own words, because we don't have to process the words that just came out of their mouth, then what tends to happen is that it makes us feel as though me and the other person are very alike. Because the illusion that it creates is that for each and every one of us, we have our own internal map, our map of the world, right? So if I want to describe the sentence of I'm afraid of heights, I have to understand every single word, right? I am afraid of heights. And my understanding of all these words could be different from another person. So which means to say that when I convert them, the feeling might be different from them. But then again, if I'm able to describe the same feeling with the same exact words as them, right? In the example of mirroring, right? Because I'm using the same words as them, the illusion that it creates is that we have the exact same map. And because of this, it builds connection with people very quickly on a subconscious level. Very often, they won't understand it. They won't understand why they like you so much for in such a short period of time, but it comes down to because subconsciously they believe that they have the same map. Let me just see. Recently I had this thought and I asked my community, why do you think can I even see the thing? What do you think? Pin this message. There's some icon. Okay. Recently I had this thought and asked my community, why do you think that the same energy wasn't given to the girls who bully boys? Cause when boys start to be toxic to girls, boys get shredded into million pieces, but hardly ever for girls who bully boys will get flamed. No one can give me a proper answer. So recently I had these thoughts and asked my community, why do you think that the same energy wasn't given to the girls who bully boys? So maybe I want to understand, like, the first sentence. I understand the second sentence, right? The one that when boys are toxic to girls and then girls basically will punish guys for it, and even guys will punish guys for it, but not vice versa, right? Recently I had these thoughts and I asked my community, why do you think that the same energy wasn't given to girls who bully boys? Maybe if I were to, I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? But I'm understanding this question from the perspective of, like, why is it that our social norm is that we do not give the same amount of treatment to girls bullying boys versus boys bullying girls? This is how I read and interpret the question. So please correct me if I'm wrong, right? And if that question is being asked to me, like, in that perspective, I would see it from the perspective of, I think socially, what we tend to do is that we tend to, by nature, protect girls over boys. And that is the natural way of the world. So even in the animal kingdom, right, if we are talking in terms of a lion, right, a larger lion versus like a lioness, I'm not sure if there ever is an example of like a larger lion like sacrificing their life for a lioness, but the whole idea is that the responsibility of the larger lion is to actually protect the tribe, right? The pride itself. So when we translate that into human beings, then males have I would say an innate expectation to protect girls. And to a certain extent, you can say that to a certain extent, guys are more seen as more disposable. So if we are using the example of like going to war, right? In a wartime, then usually what tends to happen is that the females and the children are being evacuated, right? But then the males stay behind and fight the war. So be it they live or die, right? Of course, if the guy dies, then it does affect the life of the female and the child, but then, well, the guy loses his life. So who have it worse? But it's because of this idea of like, okay, guys' responsibility is to protect girls, then it gives the idea of we tend to by nature protect girls, right? So even the whole idea of chivalry itself is to give preferential treatment to girls. So in the example of when girls are being bullied, then chivalrous guys, or maybe just normal guys that intuitively understands that we need to protect girls, would step up because they see it as not right. But then again, if a girl were to do the same to guys, then maybe the social norm that they see is like, well, the guy should be, first of all, they'll see it as like, okay, the guy should be strong enough to actually take it. And if he's not strong enough, then, well, he's weak, then he's not really a guy. Then again, there's also other thing. Is it fair, right? Is that thought fair? Not really. Is there an immediate solution to actually solve it? I also don't think so. But for me, as that part, the way that I see it is more towards like, it's an observation that people will just have to accept for now until people find a better solution to actually address that. Because again, when it comes down to pushing of equality, is that at some point we are actually taking away some advantage from girls, right? And we are taking some advantage away from guys. And to a certain extent, it's like, do people actually benefit? Of course, equality during a very bad time definitely was moving to the right direction, right? You know, in the sense of like people have equal votes and everything like that. But I don't know. It's always this whole idea. I think equality itself is also something that I think a lot about, whether or not it's benefiting to both sexes, like, you know, a net benefit. Then this defeats the purpose of feminists who fight for equality, right? Frankly, I think a lot about this, right? Think back in like early times of maybe, I don't know, 1980s. Of course, situation weren't the best for females, right? There's always things can be better, but just think of it as like there was a point in time where it's very normal for girls to choose to be a homemaker if they want to, right? The important thing about the modern life is that, like, you know, they can be a homemaker if they want to. If they want to work, they can also choose to work. But then again, when it comes down to economy wise, right, we are reaching the point where it's almost not sustainable for a one income family. So it's no longer a case where like a guy can earn an income to feed the entire family. Of course, we're not talking about extremely high earners, right? We're just talking about average earners, and the average earning capacity, as when it comes down to Singapore, is about 5,000, 6,000. So if you're using that as an example, then is equality doing justice for girls now that it's pushing girls to also have to work? Whereas in the past, they can actually choose to be a homemaker if they want to. So to me, I see this as like one of the example of like how feminism's push for equality didn't actually benefit girls as much as they want to, right? And of course, equality, there's so many issues with equality, because again, like what you described over there, right? When it comes down to how girls and guys are being treated differently, it goes much further than that. I would say that when it comes down to different levels, right? Different levels of acceptance, females in general are accepted as they are, like regardless of whether or not, of course, if a girl is more respectable, then like, you know, she's gonna be given more respect. But a useless guy and a useless girl, the useless girl will still be generally accepted by society, whereas the useless guy is going to be discarded. So the only way for a guy to be seen with any sort of value is to be successful. So just by this nature of difference, then like it makes equality such a difficult subject, right? Especially if what we want to do is that we want to equalize outcome at certain level, so such as a CEO level. So again, when we go even further of that, then it comes down to like competency, right? If just for the sake of equality, you end up putting somebody who is less competent in a position, and then the person screws up. So for example, you put an incompetent female that is not as equally competent, right, to be a CEO, and she screws up, it will actually screws the chance of every other females that comes after her. So even if a female that comes after her that truly is competent, the person who votes for the board, right, you know, the board of directors are going to see it from a perspective of like, we had a female CEO and she was not effective, so we are just not going to choose this female. So it actually screws, like, you know, by pushing for equality and you put an incompetent female in a role that she's not ready for, and of course she screws up and then she got kicked out, it actually sabotaged all the females after them. So is that really equality, right? So again, the whole discussion of equality itself is also crazy to me. Yeah, if it makes sense. But again, like, you know, this is also more towards detouring towards the thing, right? So okay, anyway, when it comes down to mirroring itself, right, the simplest way to think about it is just mirror the words back. And I preface the initial interaction from a perspective of what is your greatest fear. So if you yourself, you just heard this question, right? What is your greatest fear? I want you to actually think about the question itself, right? And the common fears that people have is what? Fear of heights, fear of the dark, maybe fear of spiders, fear of needles. There's so many different kind of fear. But then the funny thing is that for each individual fears, there is many ways to describe it. So if I use the analogy or I use the example of fear of heights, what are the ways that people can describe fear of heights? They can describe fear of heights as fear of falling. They can describe fear of heights as the fear of heights. They can describe it as acrophobia, and among all the other things. And the funny thing is that whenever people ask us this question or questions like this that have us basically do an emotional judgment. So for example, the question of what is your greatest fear is not a question that people are going to they are not going to use their brain to actually think about it. So when it comes down to answering the question such as like what is your deepest fear, what usually happens is that we will search our emotion. We will try to bring up the emotion of fear, or maybe we bring up the thing that we already know that we are afraid of, and we measure the extent of how severe and how intense that feeling is. And then we will form a phrase that describes that exact intensity. So when people use the word such as my greatest fear is that I am afraid of heights, it is not the same feeling as I am acrophobia. And it is not the same feeling as I'm afraid of falling. So when you ask the person, what is your greatest fear? And they just told you, oh, my greatest fear is that I am afraid of heights. That word is the best way to describe their biggest fear. But what tends to happen in human interaction, right? We want to be smart. We want to be special. So when somebody says that, like, if somebody tells you that their greatest fear is fear of heights, what is very common for people to do? They will rephrase. They'll rephrase, right? They'll be like, oh, so you're acrophobic. Now, if I use the word of I'm afraid of heights to you, and you use the word so you're acrophobic, what I have to do now is that I have to pause. I have to take the word acrophobic, put into my dictionary, and translate it into a feeling. And I'll compare that feeling with my feeling of my greatest fear. And the thing is, the feeling can be very similar, but they are not going to be the same level of intensity. So what does it actually mean? It means that by rephrasing it, I am actually diluting the feeling. And if you ask, and I have done this many times, right? I've always asked people to compare the feeling. If let's say they tell me that their biggest fear, word for word, is that I am afraid of heights, and then I get them to compare, which one describes your fear more accurately? The words, I am afraid of heights, or I am acrophobic. All of them have always told me that their own words is more accurate when it comes down to describing, right? Funnily enough, nobody have told me that they are exactly the same. And the thing is, they are not the same. From a human emotional perspective, these two terms are similar, but they are not the same. So it begs the question, why is it that for us, why do we paraphrase, right? To me, the reason why human beings paraphrase is because of selfishness. And they want to be smart. In another way, you can say that they want to get a sense of importance. They want to impress you. But in actual fact, rephrasing is a very selfish thing to do. Because if you actually think about what rephrasing basically is, I understood your feeling so much better than you understand your own feeling, that I am going to use the words that describe your feelings more better than you can use the words to describe your feelings. So in some sense, you can say that it's a very selfish way to think about it, right? Because it's also a very narcissistic way to actually think about it. But people don't really see this perspective. They see it as like, oh, if I actually want to bond with another person, I should paraphrase so that they understand that I have heard what they say, right? But the thing is, if you want them to know that you heard what they said, what you should be doing is that you should be mirroring their words word by word. Because that is the most surefire way for them to understand that you have heard what they said. And if you have misquoted them, they will be able to stop you immediately. They will be able to be like, oh, okay, that's actually not what I mean. From my experience, mirroring the words back to the other person word for word bonds the person very quickly, and it makes you seem as an active listener, not by paraphrasing. And again, you can also think of it as utility wise, right? If I need to constantly think about how to paraphrase things, I'm using resources where I could be using it somewhere else, right? I can actually be focusing, I can actually be thinking of like what you are saying and processing the words, but instead of doing all these things, I'm spending some resources to actually try to paraphrase your words so that I can impress you. And the outcome is that you're not even impressed and you feel more disconnected by me paraphrasing your words. So basically the closing point when it comes down to principle of mirroring is that don't paraphrase. As tempting as it is to paraphrase, don't paraphrase because it's meaningless. It's not going to get you your objective, right? The objective is to mirror the words word for word back to the person. Again, it comes down to this thing. If they don't have to process the words that just came out of your mouth, because what came out of your mouth is their own words, it makes it seem as though that both of you are very close. Because they can only describe it as like, okay, when I talk to this person, I don't have to process their words. But I talk to everybody else, I have to process their words. It must mean that I'm very close with this person. We are very similar. And then people bond. Because again, what causes people to bond is similarities. So this is principle number 1 to actually keep in mind. Principle number 2 is the sense of importance. Now, the sense of importance is a very curious concept. Because if we think in terms of a human interaction to most people who are unable to see the connection of all these things can seem extremely random. If I talk to a person, there's so many different ways that a conversation can go. We can talk about philosophy, we can talk about life, we can talk about celebrity, we can talk about sports and all the other things. There's so many different possibilities, right? If a context is that if I'm going on a date with somebody, like how do I know what she would want to talk about? Like, what should I prepare? It always comes down to one thing, right? Sense of importance. The way I see it is, so long as somebody opens their mouth for longer than 5 seconds, they are already seeking for a sense of importance. And to a certain extent, I don't think that people open their mouth for any reasons that is not going to give them some form of benefits. And the benefit can be as simple as emotional satisfaction. Just to feel better, right? Just so that like people can think of, maybe I think that I impressed the other person. Now, people, once you understand that so long as people open their mouth for longer than 5 seconds, they are seeking for sense of importance, you only need to know that sense of importance is split into only 2 categories. People get their sense of importance either 1 through validation, and validation means that they impress you in some way. And number 2 is through sympathy. The example that I like to give is for the sense of importance through validation is the example of maybe a vacation. So if you ever have a conversation with your friends, right? Maybe you just came back from a trip and then you guys are talking, oh, hi, how are you? And they're like, oh, I'm good, what about you? and then you say that, oh, you know what, oh, I just came back from a trip, right? You know, I just went on a cruise trip, and then we went to this country, and then we dropped off at this port, and then like, you know, I went on like this day adventure. I went to like these different cafes, and then like I met this local, maybe I met this girl, she's like so attractive, and then like, you know, oh, on the ship there's so many facilities, their gym is amazing, right? You know, their food is amazing, and then like, you know, I went for like these activities and everything like that, right? Whenever we talk about our cruise trip, think and ask yourself, why is it that we are talking about all these things? The answer is very simple. We are trying to impress the other person. The ideal outcome that we want to hear from the other person's mouth, be it we are consciously aware or not, is this. What we want to hear is, wow, that's amazing. You went on like the day trip with like in this particular port, and then you went to cafe hopping to these different cafes, and you meet this local, oh, and you went to do these activities, which, by the way, if you notice, I'm already mirroring myself, right? And the ideal thing that we want to hear from the other person is that, first of all, they have heard exactly what we said. So if we are sharing about our grand adventure in our cruise trip, we want to ensure that they heard every single words, and we want them to be impressed, because we don't want to tell our amazing holiday stories and then the other person will be like, oh yeah, oh that's cool, oh that's amazing, right? Usually it makes us feel like crap, right? But if the other person is actively listening, then it makes us feel amazing. Why? Because we have just got our sense of importance, because it felt like we have impressed them with our amazing story. So this is when it comes down to sense of importance, right? What about sympathy? One example that I can give for sympathy is the aspect of maybe somebody just came back from sick leave. So because they just came back from sick leave, then they'll say that, like, you know, maybe you ask them, hey, how are you feeling, man? I noticed that like you just came back from sick leave. How are you feeling? And then they'll say like, you know, oh, I'm feeling better. But however, like, you know, oh, the condition was like terrible yesterday, man. Like, you know, I didn't have enough sleep, and I took the temperature, like, you know, it's like so high, 38 degrees, and I'm feeling like body ache, and then like it's terrible, you know. But then like at the end of the day, even though this morning I woke up, I'm still feeling like, you know, not the best, but I still think of it as like, you know, I can still come to work and everything like this. But generally, I think like if I eat some Panadol, then I'll be fine. Basically, the whole story that they talk to you about, like their sob story and everything like this, is to look for one thing: sympathy, right? The ideal thing that they want to hear out from your mouth or from anybody's mouth when they tell their stories is, oh no, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Oh, then what happened? Oh, you got body ache. Wow. Oh, that's terrible, man. Oh, but then you're very amazing. Like, you know, even though it's like you're so sick, you are still able to like come to work, or like, you know, you recover fast. Wow, it seems like you're a very healthy person. So the pattern that I observe is that when it comes down to, although people are seeking sympathy, and usually the sympathy comes from being in an adverse scenario, the thing that I notice is that people actually don't like to feel pathetic. So there are certain situations where maybe life sucks, right? Life sucks. For example, if let's say they're lazy as shit and they get nowhere in life, and their life is currently a mess, maybe because they're also like suffering from some situation, maybe something recently happened to them that brings them to a very down mood, so it makes them feel like, okay, I don't want to do anything. In that situation, having the conversation with them and trying to validate that part of sympathy that, like, you know, oh, I'm so sorry that, like, you know, these are all the things, is not going to build the bond. So which means to say that the thing that builds the bond is not adverse situation. The things that build the bond and why people seek the sense of importance from validation okay, important thing to take note is they are looking for people to be impressed of their capability to endure hardship. So when people are talking about like, oh, how bad their sickness was, how bad their COVID was, or maybe like their wife just left them, right? They don't want to be validated by, wow, your life sucks, right? They want to be validated in the sense of like, your life sucks, but you're such an amazing person to be able to endure this. And if I'm in the same situation, I don't think I'll be able to do that. At the end of the day, people are seeking sense of importance. They want to feel like they are an amazing person. And again, this goes to the whole idea of we are social creatures. How do I know whether or not my standing is in the tribe, right, in a group that I'm in? How do I know that my social standing is good? The only way that I'll be able to know is that from how people react. And the only way that I'll know my social standing is to see and try to impress them, to show them that I have a better life. But the weakness of this is that people in most conversation would want to talk about what makes them impressive. So this is the part that now that we understand this is what everybody seeks, I want you to think back to a situation where you have a conversation with maybe a close friend or maybe a colleague, a family member, where they have talked to you about their amazing vacation, right? They talk to you about, oh, I went to this country, we went to this location, we did this, we saw this site, and then like, we did this, we did that. And truly ask yourself this question: do you actually care about their bloody vacation? Do you actually care about their bloody vacation? Truthfully, you couldn't give less of a shit about their vacation. But you have to be polite, right? So that you listen, right? So that you listen, because that's part of our social responsibilities. So, but again, if you are the person sharing your vacation story, what you think is that everybody is going to be impressed by your vacation story. But everybody like you are not going to be impressed by your vacation story. So what part of the understanding of the sense of importance is to realize that truly nobody really cares about our amazing story. The only person that will care about our amazing story is us. But then when we share about our amazing story, we get emotional, we feel emotionally good. And if you want to utilize this to your own advantage, then what you should be doing is, in a conversation, give all the sense of importance to the other person. That's it, right? Because the problem when it comes down to human beings, right, whenever we interact with other people, keep in mind that when I share about this principle, right, it sounds simple on paper. But when you are in an actual interaction with other person, the urge to actually assert your sense of importance will always be there. Which leads me to this phenomenon of conversational blueballing. So what is conversational blueballing? By the way, conversational blueballing is one of the cardinal sin when it comes down to social interaction. Whenever that happens in a conversation, it will always make one party feel like shit. And most of the time, the other party is not consciously aware that this is what they made the other person feel. Conversational blueballing is basically this. Going back to the example of your amazing cruise trip, right? I have all this experience, that I want to share, right? I want to talk to you about like, all the room that I got, right? Maybe I got I don't even know what type of like cabin those are called, right? Those that's like window one. So maybe like an exterior. I got an exterior cabin, and then like the food is so good. I went to casino, and then like I got like a royal flush, and then I earned like maybe $5,000. And then I went to the port, I went to this different cafe, and then I have this amazing conversation with this amazing local. And the summary of all my not really a summary, right? But in order for me to share everything to you, it will take about 30 minutes. Right? So I'll start the conversation, be like, oh, I just came back from this cruise trip and it was amazing. And then like, the ship was this. So I start my amazing story, right? 5 minutes into the story, and then I said like, oh, the food was amazing, man. Like, the food on board, right? The fine dining, right? I had this beef and like, it's amazing. That's when the other party will actually chime in. They'll be like, oh, the food in the cruise is amazing. Yeah, wow, that's good. It reminds me of the time where I went on this other cruise where the food is amazing as well. And then on this cruise, what I did was this, and the facility was this, and then when I disembarked was this. So basically, what this person have done is that they have just hijacked the conversation. They have just hijacked the conversation, and for you, because you're being polite, right? So you're sitting there, the cruise, then like, they have this thing, right? Although you are verbally telling them all these things, the only thing in your mind is that you're thinking, I hope this selfish asshole can just shut their mouth so that I can continue telling my amazing cruise story. So that is conversational blue balling, right? So whenever that happens to you, and everybody in the world have probably experienced that at some point. If it's not a cruise story, it's a gaming story, or maybe like, some past story. Maybe you're talking about like, past relationship, the past hurt, because this also applies when it comes down to sympathy as well, right? Somebody will say that like, oh, I got fever, my experience with fever is so badly, but halfway through the conversation, someone says that like, yeah, that time I also got fever, and then like, it was like so terrible and everything, like, and they basically just hijack the conversation, right? Why? Not because that they are selfish individual. Of course, in your head, you are thinking that they are a selfish, insensitive prick, but the truth of the matter is that they, like you, as human animal, they are seeking a sense of importance. It's simple as that, because it is so innate in us. So it goes back again to the closing point of sense of importance. If you want to effectively utilize sense of importance, you just need to realize that truly, no one is going to appreciate your amazing story as much as you yourself. But if you allow the other person to talk and share their amazing story, all you have to do is just sit there and mirroring things back to them, right? I went on this cruise trip, and then they have this facility. Oh, they have this facility. And then what happened next? Yeah, they have this facility, and then like, the food is amazing. And then like, I went to the casino, and then like, I managed to get like a royal flush. You managed to get a royal flush? That's amazing, man. Like, how does it actually feel and everything? Yeah, it feels great, right? You're going to give the best possible conversation to this particular person. And this is the part that I ask myself, right? From an ethical perspective, is it ethical to actually do that to other person? Yes, from one end you have your own agenda that you want, because you are trying to build the relationship as close as possible, as quickly as possible, right? Because the whole idea is that the more that you like me, the more that you're much more likely to do good things for me. Because again, we don't want people who we like to slowly dislike us by saying no. Of course, this sounds extremely manipulative, right? And to a certain extent it is. And the way that you actually utilize the goodwill that you get from influence is not as straightforward as, well, if you are my friend, you would do this for me. Because you're utilizing power already, and power will actually cause the other person to dislike you. So there is smarter ways to actually circumvent the whole interaction to your benefit, right? It's not going to be as direct as like, hey, I listened to your cruise story for like 1 hour, can you do this for me? It's not going to be as straightforward. But even if you were to have as straightforward ask as that, you would have a higher chance, mainly because they already like you. So if that makes sense, right? So again, the closing point is that give them all the sense of importance that they want. What they get out of the interaction, emotional satisfaction. What you get out of the interaction, usually whatever you want. And most of the time, whatever you want can be as simple as getting the person to like you. If we are talking in terms of relationship, this works from a relationship level. Of course, there are other factors in play, right? Such as how eager you are, right? Of course, if you are super eager, then guess what? You're not mirroring. You're not mirroring, right? Because if the person is more chill, and then you are applying your sense of importance, right? You know, oh, Elon told me to apply sense of importance. So I like super eager. Oh, what happened next? Oh, you went on the cruise trip and everything like that, right? It creates a disconnect because you're no longer synchronized with the other person. So, which is why mirroring and sense of importance goes hand in hand with each other. Yes, you can utilize one without the other, but by utilizing both together is equivalent of connecting an electric guitar to an amplifier. You can use the amplifier by itself, you can use the electric guitar by itself, but when you put both of them together, they basically work off each other. And the way I see it is that if you are able to just master these two principles, these two concepts, it encompasses 80% of the charisma process. Then maybe the closing point is very quickly, because I don't think I will be able to go too in depth of how to actually utilize this from the context of how to actually influence people from the principle of influence, right? Because utilizing power is very straightforward. Do this or else, right? Do this or else. That's power. Or like, do this, I give you this. Transactional. Influence always works on the idea of you must understand that you must never ever trigger the fuck you factor whenever you apply the influence. Which means to say that if you are trying to utilize influence, you must always be very aware to basically make the other person feel like they are in control of the interaction. At the end of the day, whatever you suggest must always be prefaced or said at the end that at the end of the day, the decision is completely up to you. And if you want to influence somebody, when it comes down to influence, you must be very wary of how to shift these two different emotions. It's either you shift fear or you shift desire. An example of utilizing this, right, from a perspective of, for example, if let's say I want, what could be something that I want? I don't know. Maybe like I want my friend to go to an event with me, as ridiculous as it sounds, right? For me, I would first have to figure out what is this person's desire and what is this person's fear. Maybe one of the examples that I can use is I can use it from the perspective of maybe sales and advisory, right? If my end goal is that I want this person to implement my suggestions, right? You know, I want to get the case from this person, then I must first figure out what is this person's desire. So the desire could be like, oh, what do you wish to achieve? So if I'm a consultant for a business, then it's kind of simple, right? You know, oh, I'm very curious. Like in an ideal situation, what do you want your company to achieve? So your company is at this current moment here. If tomorrow you can get exactly what you want and you can get the ideal perfect company, what would this company look like? If you phrase the question in an innocent enough way, the person will continue to talk and talk about their ideal company. Because people love to talk about their desires and fears. Maybe not so much of fears, right? Because fear is negative emotion, but desire usually is explained or shared from a emotion of enthusiasm and excitement. So it's like, no, I want this. I think that like I'll have this number of employee. I have all these things. I have all these things. Then maybe you link it to like, then what about your personal life? Because if you have your ideal company, it will actually change your personal life, right? So what do you think that like in the ideal scenario, your personal life will be if you have your ideal company? And then they'll share about, oh, my personal life, I'll have like this number of cars, I'll have this number of house, I'll have this, I'll be able to buy this, I'll refurnish my company, my I'll refurnish my living room, I'll renovate my kitchen, etc. So once you have established their fears and their desires, if you want to utilize influence, you have to start to shift their fears and desires to be in line with your suggestion. And first of all, the first step is always, again, mirroring whatever they tell you. Usually in let's say a sales and consultancy capacity, people will share about like the desires they want, right? Your job is just to sit there and listen. And you can apply this to the social interaction, right? If let's say you're trying to influence your friends to do whatever you want. Of course, most of the time, hopefully not all your friendship requires being like, trying to shift their behaviors, right? Hopefully you only use this when you really need to, instead of like every day, because it gets very tiring. But the whole idea is that your job is to sit there, listen, and summarize. Right? Again, this almost goes against what I said in the start, right? When it comes down to mirroring, which is don't paraphrase. But keep in mind that they have been talking for 30 minutes. You can't mirror the whole 30 minutes at the end. You can mirror along when they speak. So they can, for example, if let's say they were to say something such as like, I will have my ideal house. Oh, you have your ideal house? Yeah, I will have my ideal house. And I'll have like this car. I'll probably get a Ferrari. I'll get a Lamborghini. You'll get a Lamborghini. Oh, that's amazing, man. Then like, what else? Then like, yeah, and I'll like refurnish my kitchen, like etc. You can mirror along the way, but towards the end, you have to summarize. So it's like, oh, okay. So if I understand correctly, if you're able to get everything, like ideally what you want your company to do is that you want to have this number of employee, you want to have this number of revenue, and then if you are able to get all these things, then it means that you'll be able to get all these things that you want, right? Such as like house, cars, and everything like that. Like just to understand correctly, did I get you correctly? So this is the part where what you basically want to get from them is either a yes or no. If they say that yes, they have affirmed that this is what I want, you know that it's very simple. You just need to tie whatever you want, the outcome that you want, to what they want. So it's kind of like just joining a bridge. In the example of a sales consultancy capacity, then you can say that, okay, well, if let's say this is the thing that you want, then I take a note to this. How about I think of a plan, I draft up a plan, a business plan, a strategy plan, that we can implement this, then we can use different type of instruments to actually achieve these results. Then we can have this effective tracking system to achieve this. Like, what do you think? Right? Is it something that you want? Again, when it comes down to using influence, you must be very wary that the other person must feel like they're in control. So you must always throw the question back to them, like, is this what you want? So they can either tell you yes, they can either tell you no. If they tell you no, then you find another way you basically ask why, right? You ask questions of like, any reason why? Is it because of like something? When it comes down to influence, you must always understand this. When people feel like they are in control of an interaction, they will be very open to share. The reason why most of the time people don't share in an interaction, one is that they don't trust you. How to build trust very quickly? Refer to mirroring and sense of importance. Because the whole principle of mirroring and sense of importance is supposed to build trust and closeness very, very quickly. If you are able to do it very quickly, and by the way, if you have mastered this, forming that trust become part of your speech, your natural speech. You're able to bond with another person within 5 to 10 minutes. And then everything else is about them telling you their desires or their fears. So what about fear, right? So for example, fear is that I'm very curious about something. Like, what do you think is the worst case scenario that can happen? You must always remember that if you are trying to influence somebody, and this is not just influence itself, this is general human influence, the other person's words will always be more effective than whatever you can give. Yes, you can paint a picture of how bad it is. It will never compare with the image that they themselves paint by themselves of their own accord. So if you ask them like, what do you think the worst case scenario is? If they manage to entertain the thought, you get them to entertain the thought and they actually think about all these things, they will paint the most horrid scenario that they do not want to touch. And all you have to do is to link whatever your solution to be as far away from that as possible. So to say that like, okay, if we implement all of this, then we can prevent this from happening. Because of this, because of this, because of this. What do you think? Do you agree? What's your thoughts on this? And then again, people will share. Right? Why would people share? It comes down to one thing. Everybody is looking for a sense of importance at the end of the day. Right? So for me, this is the whole sharing of mirroring and sense of importance. And this took me about 2 hours and 20 minutes. And I would say that maybe for this one, I still went very in depth for all the different things, right? I really need to find a way to actually squeeze all this into 30 minutes so that people are able to learn and utilize this in as short as possible, as quickly as possible, so that they will actually feel like, hey, these are something that I want to use. But then again, I also feel like sometimes the explanation help people understand it clearly, especially the examples. But at least this is something that I'm thinking about, right? How to actually make a video that can help explain all these things. Yeah. But in generally, there's gonna be the two principles itself. Of course, if you are watching this and you feel like, hey, actually I want to know a little bit more, then what you can do is that you can actually go to my YouTube, right, where I've made an actual video. I think it's like 40 minutes on mirroring, 40 minutes on sense of importance. And among those videos, there's also other videos such as like how does attraction actually work, right? The simplified version, the TLDR of it is we fall in love with the perception of who the person is instead of who the person actually is, if it makes sense, right? So in any case, let me just see. I think now it's also about like 9:30. Let me just observe. Do I have any other time to share anything else? Maybe not. It's hard to say. But maybe perhaps today, this is where I'm going to end off, right? Today, I basically did another 2 hour sharing with the sense of importance again and mirroring. But hopefully, if you're watching this, right, the VODs and whatnot, you learn something from this. If you have any question, you can always ask. I'm not even sure if like Twitch is there any sort of capacity to actually drop questions, but if you were to go to my YouTube, then definitely you'll be able to drop questions that way. I think this is probably something that I need to figure out, right? At some point, probably I'm going to set up a Discord if I manage to build a community that is big enough. Makes sense? Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this. This is where I'm going to end off the stream, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.